emulators were used in the production of this podcast.
Where did you learn to podcast? That good?
That's awesome, sweetie. Thank you.
This is the Atari Jaguar Game by Game podcast, the show where we talk about Atari's last home video game console and its software library, one game at a time. Wherever you're from, whoever you are, thank you for joining me. I'm glad you're here. I am Shinto, your host for this episode, and today I will do my very best not to use my terrible fake Jamaican accent as I cue up the music to talk about part number J9003, Club Drive. Club Drive is a 2MB cartridge developed and released by Atari in November 1994 at an MSRP of just under $60 US. It's an automotive driving game with multiple distinct game modes. It's not a serious racing game or simulator, it was never intended to be, but more of an open-world driving game. It was programmed by Todd Powers, who worked at Sierra Online before joining Atari. At Sierra, he was the lead programmer behind the Island of Dr. Brain, which is a well-rated adventure puzzle game, and also worked on Conquest of the Longbow, The Legend of Robin Hood, and the VGA remake of Police Quest. After Atari, he moved to 3DO and worked on the Uprising games and Army Men Air Attack. After 3DO, he went to LucasArts and worked on such games as Thrillville and Star Wars The Force Unleashed. He was one of the 4 main Atari Jaguar developers inside Atari prior to the Jaguar's release. Club Drive was one of the games featured in Atari's hands-on announcement of the Jaguar in August of 1993, and the 1994 Winter CES in January, but didn't actually ship until late November of 1994. Why the delay? According to artist BJ West, in an interview conducted by Ross Silliphant, Lost Dragon on Atari Age, the game was delayed because Atari kept pushing Todd Powers to make it more of a serious racing game. I asked my confidential source about this, who was inside Atari at the time, and he said that the serious racing game was always intended to be Checkered Flag, but wasn't really close enough to Club Drive at the time to know if this pressure existed from the higher-ups. Club Drive was meant to be an atypical open-world driving game. Totally open-ended with different environments and locations. That was the original design philosophy behind it. A lot of emphasis, I was told, was put on rendering the environments, but with the limited engineering support for this project, that kind of came at the expense of driving physics, how the car behaves. The Jaguar voice modem, known more formally at the time as the Jaguar Voice Data Communicator, was a peripheral that would allow the Jaguar to connect to a phone line for multiplayer gaming, while also allowing voice chat at the same time. This was accomplished with a voice plus data technology developed by Phylon Incorporated, and was known as Single Call. I'll talk more about the voice modem in the Ultra Vortec episode, mostly because that's the only game to be released with voice modem support. I bring it up here because Club Drive was one of the 3 games said to be among the first to use the voice modem, along with Doom and Iron Soldier. This information is courtesy of a June 23, 1994 press release, and was also mentioned in the October 1994 issue of GamePro magazine. There's a bit more information on Club Drive and the voice modem in Volume 3, Issue 11 of Atari Explorer Online. It's a fascinating article about Adam Urbano, who attended a Jaguar focus group for market research. He was 16 years old at the time, and they watched some commercials and gave their thoughts about peripherals Atari was thinking about releasing. They got to try out several prototype products, including the CD-ROM with Virtual Light Machine and VidGrid. A driving wheel, a skee-ball machine. Yeah, skee-ball machine. You roll a ball up a plastic ramp and the Jaguar keeps score. It wasn't a big hit in the focus group, but I find it very interesting that such a device was being considered. But a big hit in this focus group seemed to be Club Drive over the voice modem. The game was said to be 90 to 95% complete, and Adam described it as a, quote, pure blast. Just wow. The voice modem handled the game without any slowdown, and the voice quality was crisp and clear, too. Club Drive ended up shipping without voice modem support. Atari Age user Rush6432 says that the voice modem code is all still there, just disabled. He couldn't find a connect sequence screen in the code, so perhaps in the focus group they used a telephone line simulator to connect two players over the voice modem. In a roundtable discussion held on Genie in December of 1994, Tom Gillen, who was a producer for several Jaguar games, focused mainly on sports titles, said that his focus was to make every multiplayer Jaguar game voice modem compatible. That didn't happen, of course, but it's a commendable goal. There is a brief glimpse of Club Drive in the 1993 Atari promotional video, which I keep referencing. It shows about 4 seconds worth of the Old West level, and doesn't look too different from the finished product, except there's nothing but the level scene, no car hood or bonnet for my UK friends, or indicators are visible. I'll include this in the show notes again. It starts about 1 minute 49 seconds in. Club Drive was among the 35 games shown off by Atari at the Summer Consumer Electronics Show in June of 1994. The UK gaming magazine Edge described the game as, quote, okay. Now, given the jaded context in which this was presented, that could be considered high praise. Let's see. They say that few of the 35 games were worth the space they occupied. That's a direct quote. They say that Atari's, quote, final triumph may be to outlast Commodore. Of the 35 games shown, most were in an extremely early stage in the development process, and the number of finished games was closer to 10. They said the Jaguar CD looks like a 21st century commode, and there's more too, but I'll get into that with future episodes. I've just started including Edge magazine in my research, and I like it. It's a good, high-quality magazine, and it's far more enjoyable to flip through than like EGM or EGM2. No love lost for Atari, though, that's for sure. Speaking of EGM, in the August 1994 issue of Electronic Gaming Monthly, purveyor of gossip Quarterman, having returned from the Consumer Electronics Show, mentioned that Club Drive should have been finished months ago, and Atari had been holding onto it forever. By the way, and this is getting off track from Club Drive, no pun intended, but as long as I'm at the 94 Summer CES, many of the 35 games never saw a commercial release. These include titles like Jack Nicklaus Cyber Golf, Creature Shock, and Demolition Man. Club Drive was previewed in the July 1994 issue of GamePro magazine. In this preview, they say that Club Drive is the first Jaguar game to feature a full 640 by 480 screen. That's about twice the resolution of typical Jaguar games, but I couldn't independently verify that this was the case. Dan McNamee, or McNamee, lead tester for Club Drive, approximated 320 by 200 resolution in that Genie roundtable discussion that I mentioned earlier. So getting back to GamePro, they mention lush graphics, deep gameplay, with 1 and 2 player modes. They go on to describe the game modes, which I'm not going to list here because I'm covering that very soon and I don't want GamePro to steal my thunder. They say that the digitized backgrounds will make you forget that Atari ever created pole position, and close the article by saying Club Drive, quote, provides a lot of room for exploration. Club Drive is a 1 to 2 player game rated kids to adults by the ESRB, a rating which is now known as E for Everyone. This was renamed in 1998 and has nothing at all to do with the game that I'm covering, so I'll just move on. The manual describes Club Drive as a theme park in the year 2098, where indestructible cars designed by one Dr. Lawrence Phosphorus are able to drive around in a variety of different environments: an Old West ghost town, a skateboard park but for cars, a recreation of San Francisco, or even your neighbor's house. Apparently, around the 2040s, driving was made illegal because of safety concerns. But thanks to the work of Dr. Phosphorus, the Club Drive theme park is proven mathematically safe, so the driving ban was lifted for this place alone. It's an interesting backstory. So, maybe there's a future where the only way we can get around is in Google's self-driving cars or Johnny Cabs.
You're in a Johnny Cab.
Because humans make bad decisions behind the wheel. That makes sense. It also makes sense that humans would yearn to re-experience or experience for the first time what it's like to drive around, and a theme park might spring up around that. If the IAAPA considers the attraction to be completely safe and lobbies the government to lift the driving ban. So far, so good. There are 4 distinct zones in Club Drive. Each one has 2 different versions depending on the game variation. Velocity Park is like a skateboard park, but for indestructible future cars. San Francisco is a pseudo-recreation of San Francisco, California, circa 2010. The Old West is a 19th century ghost town. The manual says real ghost town twice. It also says yee-haw. So if I could get my time machine working, I'd go back to the Old West and see if people actually said that on a regular basis. I don't think they did. It's probably like Australians supposedly saying "G'day mate" all the time. Now granted, I didn't spend much time in that country, but I never once heard anyone say "G'day mate." Maybe you have to go to the tourist traps for that. I don't know. I was there to work. Hey Serblander, are you listening to this podcast? Care to comment on this? Anyway, the 4th zone is Jerome's Pad, where you are a toy car driving around a duplex. When reading previews of this game, this is what I found most compelling. This sounded really cool. And according to my source, this is named after an engineer who helped refocus the game partway through its development. I did some checking and would have to assume that this was Jerome Strock, who worked at Atari at this time developing Lynx games alongside his friend Eric Ginner, who I profiled in episode 3 and still haven't landed on how to pronounce his name. I'll cover the various worlds in more detail later, but for now let's move on to the different game modes available in Club Drive. There are 3 different modes: Collect, Tag, and Race. Tag is for 2 players only, and the others can be for 1 or 2 players. If it's a 2-player game, it involves a horizontal split screen, which I'll talk about a little bit later. The Collect mode involves finding and grabbing a randomly placed object. The game calls these Power Balls, but I've always called them giant koosh balls. Do you remember koosh balls? They were a clump of rubber filaments, roughly ball-shaped at times, and usually pretty colorful. They were popular in the late 80s, if memory serves. Anyway, that's what these objects look like to me, giant electrified koosh balls. Now, koosh is a registered trademark of Hasbro, and since I haven't filed a request to use the name koosh in this podcast, I will have to begrudgingly refrain from calling these giant koosh balls for the remainder of the podcast. So, 1 giant oosh-K ball at a time will be placed somewhere in the level, and you'll need to track it down and run into it. When you do so, you'll get a happy sound for player 1, and for player 2 if doing a 2-player game. Then another ball will be placed at a random location, and so on. You can select the goal, the number of power balls to collect, from as low as 5 to as many as 40. The first one to reach that goal wins. The collection is timed, and the fastest score is saved on the cartridge, so if you're playing this one by yourself, you're generally trying to beat your fastest time. Also, in single player, you may have a ghost car driving around.
It's a ghost car! Ooh. There are ghost cars all over these highways, you know.
Hold me.
Only if you hold me.
I put that in mostly for my old friend Cert. I don't know if he's listening to this podcast. He did own a Jaguar, but that's one of his favorite Simpsons quotes, so gotta be in there. Tag mode. I wasn't going to describe how tag works. I figured everybody played tag at recess in school, but that might not be the case. I remember news reports circling several years ago about how tag is being banned in schools. So yeah, I'm going to explain how tag works. So 1 player is it. That player attempts to chase down and touch another player, probably yelling, "You're it," and optionally, no tagbacks, at which point the other player becomes it, and the cycle begins anew. In Club Drive, this is done with cars. You're told who is it at the start of the game, and a rubber stamp style graphic shows up on the screen of the player who's it. The goal of the game is to avoid being tagged for long enough to reach the time threshold that you set when choosing the game. The default time is 60 seconds, but you can go as low as 30 seconds or go up to 90, 120, or 180 seconds, which some might call 3 minutes. The amount of untagged time is cumulative, so, 3 minutes total, not 3 consecutive minutes. Each player's current untagged time is shown on the screen in both a numeric format and as a progress meter. You can select up to 2 songs to play during the game of tag, and it'll alternate between them as the other player is tagged, and I think that's a nice touch. Upon tagging the other player, you'll hear the appropriate player's exclamation of success.
All right.
Or,
Yes.
in my testing, this game has always started off with player 2 being it. I don't know if this is randomly assigned or just happened to be player 2 each time, or if it's simply always player 2. I'm reminded of a Dilbert comic strip. Dilbert is visiting the trolls in the accounting department, who, of course, look like trolls, and the one giving him the tour says, "Over here we have our random number generator," and points to a troll sitting at a desk, saying 999999. Dilbert asks if that really is random, and the tour guide says, "That's the problem with randomness, you never can be sure." Racing mode involves going back and forth between checkpoints on a map, which are shown as black and white checkered zones. It's an open-ended race, meaning you can choose your own path, so it's not clearly indicated where you need to go, and that caught me off guard the first time I played it, and may be off-putting for some who are used to well-defined courses with flashing arrows pointing in the direction you need to go. Club Drive is not that kind of game, so you find your own best way to the checkpoint. Racing can be done 1 player against the clock or 2 players against each other. The clock is still there too, and you can choose the number of laps you want to require, which is anywhere between 1 and 6. When you cross the finish line on the last lap, either player will say, "Woo!" After each game, you get a replay of the last few minutes of the level using the game's fixed cameras, which I'll cover shortly. You can pause the replay by holding down the pause button, and fast forward with the option button. While the replay is on the screen, you'll see your ranking. The game gives you a rank based on how quickly you finish the level. I've recorded most of these, it's possible that I missed a few, and the order might not be entirely correct.
Edit.
Okay, there were a few I missed, adding up to 15 in total. Here's a complete rundown from slow to fast. Asphalt Turtle, Roadblock, Granny, Tour Guide, Slowpoke, Rookie, Cabbie, Pro, Ace, Super Dude, Rippin', Speed Demon, Insurance Risk, Maniac, and Pizza Guy.
End of edit.
If you've beaten one of the best times recorded for that game and world, you'll be treated to different music while you enter your initials. By default, all the times are 64 minutes, 4.05 seconds. I would venture a guess that this is the birthday of the lead developer, Todd Powers, in ISO 8601 format with a 2-digit year, so April 5th, 1964. Am I right, Todd? Instead of initials on these entries, there are little square images, which I can't make out. I don't know what they are. You control your car with a D-pad and 3 buttons, which is handy because your Jaguar controller has a D-pad and 3 buttons. Button A is your brake, button B is your accelerator, and button C throws you into reverse. It makes sense, but the directional pad has some extra flavor to it. It's not just left and right to turn. You can turn slower, a more gradual turn, if you push up and left or up and right, the upper diagonals. The lower diagonals are for quicker turns, so if you want to fling your car around 180 degrees, hold down left or down right and mash the accelerator. It works even better in reverse. It's an interesting design decision. It's not obvious, but I think the extra control is a welcome feature, somewhat compensating for the lack of an analog stick, and it'll help you get the best use out of those squealing tires. I mentioned a couple times earlier the online roundtable discussion on Genie, December 1994. There was a question asked there if the menu option for analog control was still in the game. Dan McNamee, who's lead tester for Club Drive, said, "Yup. There isn't a menu option, but it does look like analog control is approximated in those D-pad diagonals." The pause button simply pauses the game. There are no options from inside the pause menu, though the image of a dude in the hammock looks pretty relaxing. I'd pause this game to go lay out in a hammock and read a book. That sounds nice. The option button will rewind your position, so if you get into a bad place, you can hold down option until you get back on your feet, or tires as it were. In timed games, this doesn't rewind time, just your car's position. And you can actually rewind quite a bit, several minutes in fact. There's an automatic rewind, so if you drive off the game world, it'll automatically rewind to the point just before you drove off over the edge. An interesting point on that, if you're playing tag, it will rewind the time if you drive off the edge, so you can't keep driving off the edge of a map and run out your time that way. The keypad is also used, but there was never an official Club Drive overlay. Somebody at some point designed one. I see it listed in the source code of the Just Clause Overlays webpage, but I can't get a copy of the actual file. Even the Internet Archive's Wayback Machine doesn't seem to have a copy.
Edit.
But instead of all that, I figured I could make my own overlay design, so I did. You can find it in the show notes.
End of edit.
So here's what the keypad buttons do. 1, 2, or 3 will stabilize your view. It's like plopping your car straight down and can be helpful if you find yourself in a precarious state. It's not a surefire way to get yourself out of a dizzying situation, but it usually helps. Otherwise, I would suggest the option button to rewind. Buttons 4 through 9 will adjust the view. 4 shows your car from the front so you can see behind it because there's no rear view mirror in your car. Button 5 is called Camera on a Stick and places the camera almost directly behind your car, keeping your car in a fixed point on the screen, kind of like Night Driver for the Atari 2600, but a narrower angle. If you've ever seen videos taken with a GoPro attached to a stick, it's kind of that perspective. 6 is the Drop Camera button. So imagine dropping a camera out of your car window, and the camera's on a mount that'll automatically track your car as you move around. You can only drop one camera at a time, so switching to a different view will let you drop a new one. Camera dropping only works in collect and tag modes, not racing. 7 is your view from inside the car. This is the default. In one-player games, you see your hood. In two-player games, you'll have to assume the hood still exists because you can't observe it. Take that, quantum mechanics. 8 is the chase button, where the view varies depending on how fast you're going and in what direction. It starts out behind your car, pretty close up, and expands out as you gain speed. It swings over to a front-of-the-car view when you're backing up. 9 is a fixed camera. So imagine there are several cameras spread around the game world, and whichever one is closest is the one in use. It pans around to follow you as long as you remain in that zone. Move to a different zone, switch to a different camera. There are many cases where objects between you and the camera will totally block your view, so your car ends up not being visible on the screen at all. Like the drop camera, this is not available in race mode, just collect and tag. If you hit 6 or 9, drop camera or fixed camera, while in race mode, it'll switch to the chase camera. The bottom row on the keypad controls the music. Star or pound will change the station with a nice bit of static as you switch between them. The 0 button will pause the music. Like other Jaguar games, holding star and pound will reset the game, though I found that it's not always immediate. If you try to reset while the level is actively loading, it might not work right away, so keep trying. High scores, volumes, speed settings, and the control scheme are all saved to the cartridge, and you can reset these to defaults by holding star, pound, and option from the Club Drive main game screen. Those are the controls, so let's talk about the interface, what you see. When you first turn on the game, you'll see a beautiful vista with the Club Drive Resort Island off in the distance. A red polygonal car will drive up and stop to take in the view. If you just leave the controls alone, you'll see a large Club Drive name surrounded by palm trees, and before long we'll start to show the credits. The credits appear on a roadside billboard with a guy lounging in front of him. After the credits, you'll see the high scores, or rather the best times for each game and level. If you want to skip straight to the high scores, hit the 6 button. This is totally undocumented, and it very well may be a Jaguar Game by Game podcast exclusive trick. Yes, all the best info, find it right here.
Sarcasm detected.
You can also change the radio station or pause the music from the title sequence. So, credits and high scores and title screen are all well and good, but it doesn't make for a very compelling game, so try hitting one of the fire buttons. You may need to wait for the red car to start to drive up to the edge of the parking lot before your button will register. At that point, you'll see the large Club Drive logo for a second, which will shrink down to show the game selection interface, with Start Game highlighted by default. You move the D-pad up or down to select what you want to change. Your options are Game, World, Car Colors, and a separate options screen. We'll start with the boring one first. In the options screen, you can adjust the volume of the music and sound levels. They start off both at 100%, and you can move left or right to adjust them. The sound slider covers both engine noise and other in-game sounds like crashing. If you want to just turn off the engine noise, move down to engines and either move left or right or hit a button to toggle the value from noisy to silent and back. Those are the only two possible values. If you move down to the speed option, you can select between slow and fast. With slow, your speed is limited to about 52 miles per hour. With fast, you can hit 104 miles per hour in a straightaway, and your steering is much more sensitive. I find it pretty slippery and hard to play like this in fast mode, but there are ramps and jumps and other things that may require the higher speed in order to clear. If you select the buttons option, you can switch between 6 different configurations for the 3 fire buttons. You can move left or right to switch between them, and they don't wrap around, so to go back to the default, just hit left a bunch of times. Any fire button will bring you back to the options menu, and from there you can return to the main menu. You can change your car color from the main menu by moving the highlight over to cars and hitting a button to cycle between the various colors. There are 6 colors to choose from, and certain colors have different body styles for your car. There are 3 different body styles. Yellow and cyan share one, white and blue share another, and green and red share the third. Players 1 and 2 can select their cars independently and simultaneously. They can choose the same colors if they like. Above the car selection is an option to change the world. Yes, you can change the world. Hit a button to select it, the menu disappears, and then you can highlight which world you want to play. Left for San Francisco, right for the Old West, up for Velocity Park, and down for Jerome's Pad. Any fire button will select the world. I keep saying fire button. It's synonymous with face button or action button, any one of the big 3 buttons, you know what I mean. And finally, at the top of the menu, you can change the game type. Hit a button on that to activate the game selection menu, where you can toggle between the various options by moving left or right. They are racing 1 player, racing 2 players, tag 2 players, collect 1 player, and collect 2 players. From the racing menu, you can move down to choose the number of laps. Again, left and right on the D-pad switch between the numbers. From the tag menu, you can select the time and each of the 2 tunes that you want to play. You'll hear a preview of the currently selected song. In the collect menu, you can choose between the number of power balls, hit a button to return to the main menu, and then start game. When you start a game, your objective is shown on the screen while the music plays and the level loads. In collect and tag games, you'll automatically be dropped into the game. In race mode, you'll be prompted to press fire to continue. Ah, they call it a fire button too. I feel somewhat vindicated. There's a status bar in both 1 and 2 player games, which is pretty much the same in both. In 1 player, it appears at the bottom of the screen and just has player 1's data. In 2 player, it appears in the middle of the screen and shows both players' info. On the left is the timer. The large central section shows your compass direction in the left corner, map in the center showing the position of both players, and the numeric score in the right corner. It could be the number of power balls you've collected, the number of laps, that sort of thing. On the far right side of the status display are your progress meters, which give you a quick visual representation of how close you are to winning or how close your opponent is. Around the status display is each car's view of the world. The world is rendered in flat polygons. There is no shading at all, so a road stretching out before you is the same uniform color. Way off in the background, or through the windows, you have bitmapped scenery, appropriate for each world. There's no anti-aliasing around the polygons, so expect jaggies. I suppose I could just as easily say, this is a polygon game from 1994, expect jaggies. You'll occasionally have textures, little textures, road signs, for example, but the flat polygons clearly rule the world. So let's talk about those worlds a bit more. Each world has its own default theme song, but you can easily change the tune while you're in the game. For Jerome's Pad, that default song is called Drive By. Like all worlds, there are 2 variations, a large one for racing and a smaller one for tag or collect modes. The small version has a bed, a bathroom, a coffee table with a ramp leading up to it, a dresser with a drawer hanging open, and a TV showing a nice game of Pong. If you drive into the toilet, you'll hear a flush. The racing version of Jerome's Pad is much larger. It has 2 animated fireplaces, a dining room, kitchen, living room, a staircase you can't climb, and a TV showing a duplicate of your in-game view. From the right angle, you can get a Hall of Mirrors effect. The kitchen is a bit of a mess. A 1-quart carton of milk has fallen to the floor, spilling some of its contents. A chunk of cheese
Cheddar, delicious.
is sitting on the floor. There's a cat and a mouse running around too. The mouse tries to eat the cheese, the cat chases the mouse gets away, rinse and repeat. The cat has a fairly low polygon count, so don't go expecting high-end features like, legs. If you run into the mouse, it'll squeak. If you run into the cat, it'll meow. If you run into a door, it'll creak, but not open any further. On the lower level, there's a piano, and running into that will play a jaunty tune. Lovely. There's another toilet, I think, here in this racing version. Basically, it's like driving around a decent-sized condo. Pretty impressive. It's clear a lot of work went into building this world. Next world, the Old West. Its default song is called Garters. In the smaller version of this world, for tag or collect modes, you have a row of Old West-style buildings surrounding a street with mountains all around. There are warps, and that's about it. The larger version has 2 small towns separated by a mountainous pass that you have to cross. There are 2 main roads, 2 main paths, optional mine shafts connecting them. There's a large green hill covered in tombstones, snow-capped mountains as you gain a high altitude, formations reminiscent of Monument Valley in Arizona, and some cacti that apparently hurt when you run into them. Next up, San Francisco. Its theme song is appropriately called Tenderloin. Unlike the other worlds, 1-player racing and 2-player racing are different. The 2-player racing takes place in the same smaller arena as tag and collect modes. Basically, it's a 2-level parking garage with a set of warp tunnels and ramps leading up to the top. A hole in the upper layer has a couple of road markers at the corners to warn you not to fall in. Feel free to ignore their warning if you like. The 1-player race mode is massive. It's a recreation of San Francisco, starting from the Golden Gate Bridge and driving into what must be the Tenderloin district. You have a lot of buildings, a whole lot of homes on the hilly roads. There are some landmarks that I would probably recognize if I spent more time in San Francisco. There's a streetcar driving around too. You can follow the signs to the beach, and on the way back, follow the signs to the bridge. In between are winding roads, tunnels, bridges with guardrails, cliffs without guardrails, palm trees, beach houses, and a pier which marks the other end of the course. It's a big level. A ton of work went into those houses and the other buildings, and if you just stick to the fastest course, you'll never see most of them. And finally, Velocity Park. There you'll be blasting Club Wave. The tag and collect modes are a lot like a skateboarding park, but for cars. You have a couple of green half pipes on the outside edges, each with a ledge on top. There are several buildings with glowing slits and one with the Atari logo on it. There's several ramps, a tunnel, and a warp. The race mode of Velocity Park it's a lot like a Hot Wheels racetrack, an orange track with hills and twists and dips. It's all connected, one big rectangle, so you can go the long way around or turn around and tag the finish line from behind where it's closer. All around the track is a plain green field. There are some sounds in the game besides the ones I've already included. There's your engine noise, both idling and accelerating. If you crash into something, you'll hear... And if you run through a warp, you'll hear a very, very quiet version of the crashing sound. If I wasn't listening very closely with the engine noise and music turned off, I probably would have missed it. There's one other song named Spin Out, it's not the default in any world and it has to be manually selected. That could be because it's weird. It is a weird song. Now, part of it instantly reminded me of one of the terminal songs in the Lynx game Electro Cop. So here's Spin Out in Club Drive. And here's Electro Cop. Alright, maybe they're not all that similar, and nobody credited in Electro Cop also worked on Club Drive, so It's a bit of a minor coincidence, and I wouldn't even bring it up except I already went through the trouble of plugging my links into Bishop to capture the music. Bishop, by the way, handles all my audio capture.
Finally, a bit of recognition.
Now, Bishop, you're programmed to know how important you are to the show.
That is not as reassuring as you think it is.
There are several secrets and other codes in this game. I'll go over a couple of them now, and the others I'll wrap in a spoiler alert. My rule of thumb is if it's something that you can find on your own through exploration, I'll consider that a spoiler. If it's something that requires some magic incantation, like a secret code, I don't consider them spoilers, and I'll talk about them outside of that context. First, there is a whole other world that you can select from the world selection screen. So you go to the world selection, hold down the buttons 4 and 2 on the keypad. It's a clear Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy reference. There's no confirmation sound, but you'll see that none of the 4 worlds are highlighted now. You can undo this enchantment by moving the D-pad, but if you hit a button when there's no visible highlights, you'll see that you've selected Planet Todd, named after the programmer Todd Powers. All the game modes work in this world, and the default song is Club Wave, just like Velocity Park. There's no preview while the level is loading, just 3 question marks. In Tag and Collect mode for Todd's World, you're playing in an arena with a half pipe on one end, 2 large cubes at another, and a couple of triangles with a gap between them. If you're playing with a car set to fast speed, you can jump that gap. In Race mode, it's a bit hard to explain. I'm not quite sure what's going on here. You have a yellow half pipe, and you have large, oddly shaped objects. You have what appears to be a series of narrow ledges for you to drive. There's a jump that you can only make in fast mode, maybe even 2 jumps. I haven't gotten the second one to work, and 1 warp point that I could find. There's a debug mode in the game that you can activate while playing by pressing the 8 and 6 keys on the keypad. There are 3 rows of hexadecimal numbers, the camera position, I'm guessing. In addition to the numbers, this mode also enables the drop camera and fixed camera views in race mode, whereas they weren't before. You can toggle debug mode on and off. The last 3 secrets don't involve any magic incantation, just a bit of exploring, so in case you want to discover these on your own, Bishop. Spoiler alert.
Spoiler alert. Spoiler alert. If you wish to avoid spoilers, skip ahead 2 minutes 36 seconds on my mark. 3, 2, 1, mark.
In the Old West world, the large racing map, there are a series of mine shafts around the middle. If you enter into the mine shafts from the right, which is the top of the map, and work your way in, you'll find a glowing rectangle. Drive into that, and you'll find yourself outside the Atari headquarters at 1196 Borregas Avenue, Sunnyvale, California. You can drive all around the building, which has pretty good detail and the Atari sign hanging out front. There's a flashing rectangle on one side that'll take you back to the Old West, to the opposite town. Behind the Atari building is a small rocket, sitting vertically on a little launch pad. It doesn't seem to do anything, nothing happens when you run into it. I asked my confidential informant about that rocket, but didn't hear back from him or her as of press time. So if I learn anything new, I'll update my blog entry for this episode.
Edit.
I did hear back from my contact inside Atari at the time, so if you don't want to have to head to the show notes for the story, here's what he or she told me. The reason there's a rocket behind the Atari headquarters here on Club Drive is because Jerome and Todd used to set off model rockets of all shapes and sizes in the parking lot behind the building. They even tried strapping rockets to a radio-controlled car. They did this sometimes when a new build was compiling, or other times, just for fun.
End of edit.
The rocket, though, could be related to the next secret. So instead of entering the mine shafts from the right fork of the map, try going in from the left, which is on the bottom of the map. You work your way in and find a big blue rectangle. It's not glowing, but it still stands out against the green of the mine shaft. So drive into that, and you'll find yourself in an area surrounded by green hills with a small lake, a rocket nose down at a 45-degree angle, and, a big bipedal dinosaur. T-Rex, I would guess, based on the proportions. The rocket seems much larger than the one behind Atari HQ, so, again, I don't know. I have no explanation for this. A glowing blue rectangle on one of the hills on the outside will take you out of the strange land and back to the starting town. All the mine shafts are somewhat connected and empty out to a central hub on the map, so really any entrance to the mines can lead you to these two hidden areas. The last hidden level can be found in the racing version of Jerome's pad. You'll need to have your car set on fast in order to make it, but if you hop the barrier and drive into the lower level fireplace, you'll find yourself magically transported to a castle, complete with a moat and drawbridge. There's a center pillar in this castle, and on one side of that is a flashing rectangle to take you back. It'll drop you off on the kitchen table.
End of spoilers. The remainder of this episode is certified 102% spoiler-free.
Club Drive can be found either in black or gray cartridge shells. The gray is far more common than the black. The cartridge features Club Drive in blocky rock-textured letters, a polygonal yellow car bursting through a picture of the island with the Golden Gate Bridge in the background. It has a logo indicating 1 or 2 players, and this is the first game I've covered so far to include the ESRB rating, K to A, kids to adults, ages 6+. The box has similar artwork, the yellow car bursting through, but here you can see the whole thing, with the Club Drive title appearing similar to the title screen in the game. It also has the ESRB label and the 1 or 2 players logo. The front screenshot shows the World Select screen. For the screenshots on the back, clockwise from the top left, you have the fixed camera view of a car jumping over a ramp in Velocity Park, then the chase camera view of a car driving over the Golden Gate Bridge, a 2-player split-screen game of tag in the San Francisco parking garage, and finally a view of houses lining the hilly streets of San Francisco. The text of the box reads as follows: "Own the fastest coupe on the Golden Gate or the kitchen floor. Sure, you've always wanted to blaze down the streets of San Francisco in a souped-up hot rod just like in those action movies, but have you ever wanted to scramble across the living room floor playing tag in a miniature racing car with a buddy? Or plow through an old west town in a futuristic speed machine picking up randomly placed energy powerballs? Strap in and join the 64-bit club." The text is duplicated in German and French. The manual is a 14-page stapled monochrome booklet and covers the basics of the game in far less detail than I have here, because if they did that, then it would require a much larger booklet and nobody would ever read it. Reviews of the game at the time of release were generally negative. Electronic Gaming Monthly didn't even review it, and GamePro magazine gave it the following scores out of 5. Graphics 3.5, Sound 2.5, Control 3.5, Fun Factor 3.0, and they rated the challenge to be intermediate. They call it an unusual 3D driving experience, presenting a variety of challenges and levels rarely seen in other driving simulations. They say that while it's novel at first, the 1-player action eventually gets tedious. The 2-player modes steps it up slightly, but is not much better than average racing games. The controls are simple, the graphics are good, but the colors are drab, and the sound is poor with the limited effects available. In closing, they say that while it's nice to see a driving sim bring some fresh ideas to the genre, unfulfilled potential and repetitive racing keeps this one from taking the trophy. Club Drive was reviewed in Atari Explorer Online, Volume 3, Issue 13 for December 1994. On a scale of 1 to 5, this reviewer gave the graphics a 4, audio 3, control 3, gameplay 5, and overall 4, which translates to excellent, may have a few small detracting factors, enough good points to make it a must-have. In the game list, Club Drive has a score of 8 out of 10, matching the review score. Though interestingly, a couple weeks later in Volume 3, Issue 14, that score was lowered to 7. It was then lowered to 6 in Volume 4, Issue 6 for August 21st, 1995, and when Jaguar Explorer Online launched at the end of March 1997, that score was lowered again to 5. Make of that what you will. The Atari Age external reviews have a high of 70% and a low of 20%, for an average of 45% across the 5 reviews. On Moby Games, there are 4 reviews in the 60% range and 8 below 40% for an average of 38%. The manual doesn't include any tips for playing the game, and I really don't have any either, but GamePro saves the day with a couple. When searching for Powerballs against the clock, use the map to quickly locate them. When on cliffs or tables, be careful when backing up. There is no indicator to tell you when to stop. And that's it. Club Drive has a rarity of 2 on Atari Age, meaning it's a pretty common game. Loose on eBay, it seems to be selling for between $15 and $20, with a complete in-box going for around $30 to $35. I don't know, that seems like a lot of money for a low-rated common Jaguar cart. If it's new in the box you're after, Video 61 has it listed for $30. There is an entry for Club Drive in the Jaguar High Score Club on Atari Age. In a one-player race, 1 lap, the overall winner was Inferno, and these are his times. Jerome's Pad, 19.7 seconds. San Francisco, 1 minute, 50.5 seconds. Old West, 45.8 seconds. Velocity Park, 57.4 seconds. And Planet Todd, 8.9 seconds. Yeah, if you're just doing 1 lap, Planet Todd really can be finished that quickly. There is a major epoch in my life, a point where everything changed, where my life before was very different from my life after. And this is known as having kids. Most of my Jaguar collection was in the years BC, before children, but there are a few AC, after children. Club Drive falls into this latter category. I didn't have it before my kids were probably 3 and 5 years old. I didn't expect much when I plugged it in. I read the reviews, I held off on buying it at retail, and to be honest, I have a decent feel for what to expect from polygon-heavy Jaguar games. So I plugged it in, selected the default first game mode, which is 1-player Powerball in Jerome's Pad. It dropped me in the game, and, well, you know the old saying, you never get a second chance to make a first impression? It worked out very well for Club Drive. It was super smooth, fast, and clean. I drove around catching the giant Ushke balls while my kids cheered me on, pointing them out on the screen when they appeared. I didn't consider them old enough to play, so I just did the 1-player collect games, trying out each world. I was impressed, really pleasantly surprised by Club Drive. The kids asked to play it, or rather watch me play it, a couple times in the weeks that followed, but that was years ago, years since I last picked up this game, prior to preparing for this episode. Now I've gone through this game backwards and forwards, and my opinion is less favorable. For example, it feels very buggy sometimes. Try driving at a low speed with the chase camera on, and it's like you keep whacking your forehead against the trunk of the car, or the boot of the car if you prefer UK listeners. It's terrible. You could be sitting still, and yet you're still moving, turning in a slow circle or creeping forward even though the surface is flat. It jitters and skips, and your car can do all sorts of crazy things, like spinning a couple times at a weird angle while you drive over a little bump. You can be stopped sideways on a hill, revving your engine like crazy. Your speed is reporting 134 miles per hour, and yet you're just very slowly creeping ahead. These are issues which could have or perhaps should have been resolved prior to shipping. I didn't have to dig deep to find these bugs, and I'm not even including the occasional gaps between the textures, which are fleeting and cosmetic but still present. So I was leaning toward giving this game a trash rating on the old no-swear gamer scale. My son, 7 years old, came into my office, all my game stuff is in my home office now, to see what I was playing, and I showed him the game, the various modes, the various worlds, the hidden stuff. He's been itching for me to cover a 2-player Jaguar game since I started this podcast, so I plugged in a second controller, and we tried some of the 2-player modes. This is the sort of reaction I got from him.
Are you just trying to ram me?
No, whoa!
That is not how a trash game sounds.
Oh, you got it. Yeah, I just tried to ram you.
So what can I do? Well, let's break it down. Here's what I like about Club Drive. The music. This is the first game I've covered on the show to have in-game music, and it's technically quite good. There's some definite talent behind these songs. My favorite is Club Wave because, well, musicians out there, listen to this and pay special attention to the time signature. Is that 6/4? It sounds like 6/4, and it switches to 4/4 in a few places. That's pretty unusual for video games, and it reminds me a bit of my very favorite band Dream Theater, whose songs are known to change time signatures often, and they make it work. I'm totally into that style of music. In fact, the theme song for this podcast, in my first pass of it, I had written it in 5/4 time, with a single measure of 2/4 time every fifth measure. It worked out in my head, not so much on the metronome, so I went with something simpler in the end. Another thing I like about the music is how it starts at the loading screen. I've had my fill of silent loading screens, so having the music kick off right away is nice. Around the mid-90s, I would find myself thinking, wouldn't it be cool to have a game that included an entire city rendered in 3D, and you could just drive around, stop at a building, and walk into that building, just a whole environment that you could explore. Club Drive seems to be a first step toward that goal. I liked driving around San Francisco exploring, trying to drive into people's garages to see if that would warp me somewhere. It's an ambitious open-world concept, not fully realized, of course, but I like where it was going.
Yes!
Your car has translucent glass, and the brake lights work. I expected them not to light up when you hit the brakes button. And finally, and most importantly, I liked playing this game with my son. He's excited about it, he asks to play it, and even plans on recreating some of the secret areas in Minecraft.
Woo!
Here's what I don't like about Club Drive. First of all, the bugs, as I mentioned. They make the game feel incomplete and rushed. I can't say this for certain, but the impression I get playing this game is that the developer fell into the rabbit hole of creative nuance, spending a lot of time building the levels. Wouldn't it be cool if we had a cat and mouse? Wouldn't it be cool if we had a streetcar? How about if I add another street with more houses on it? There's room. Let's add a bunch of boulders in the road to mix things up, or slot canyons with natural arches that you can jump if you're going fast enough. I love secret levels. Let's add several of those. And before you know it, the game is 6-8 months behind schedule, and you're feeling the pressure to get it out the door, to fix the critical bugs and ship it, even if there are some obvious but non-crashing bugs still in there. I probably should have reached out to Todd Powers, even though I'm totally not comfortable with that sort of thing, to get his take on this. I don't know. If somebody contacted me asking specific questions about design decisions on software I wrote 20 years ago, I'm not sure I would take that well, and I think it would be off-putting. Getting back to my dislikes here, sorry, I didn't mean to go off on a tangent. Even with all the camera views available, I can't find one I really like, and I feel the view is never quite sufficient. I can't see as much as I want. A behind-the-car view from farther back, not necessarily on a stick so you can see your car as it turns. You know, the kind of view that you get with any modern driving game. I wish it had that. The sounds are really sparse, as GamePro mentioned, other than the drone of the engine. It made it easy to capture all the sounds from the game for my podcast, but the game could have benefited from more variety in the sound effects. The frame rate. While it's super smooth in one player, especially in the smaller worlds, it really suffers when you add a second player. It's still playable, but the low frame rate mixed with the unpredictable motion of your car, there's an early Jaguar magazine advertisement that promises 3D graphics real enough to make you blow chunks. The frame rate in 2-player Club Drive when your car is spinning wildly, yeah, that'll do it. I can see why the guy in the Atari focus group loved this game so much. 2-player Club Drive on separate consoles would have been the best of both worlds, smooth frame rate and the fun 2-player action. Jaguar voice modem support, or even better, a JagLink network, it might have given Club Drive a bit of a cult following. So how do I rate this? Do I split the difference and give it a meh rating, or do I add the weight to the fun factor and give it a low solid? I'm going to give it the meh rating. I can't in good conscience call this game solid with the bugs I encountered, so it's going to have to be one step below that, which is the meh rating. But just barely. Meh and a half.
Alright!
But that's my opinion. What do you have to say? I posted on Facebook asking users to rate Club Drive on the No Swear Gamer scale, which has one of 4 levels: Hall of Fame, Solid, Meh, and Trash. Timothy simply says Trash. Greg says Solid, since he had fun playing the game with friends, and they especially loved the apartment level.
Insert last minute addition here.
Willie from ColecoVisions and Atari 5200 Supercast gives this a 5, that is below trash, and says, send it to a person you don't like. Aaron also gives this a trash rating. He says that he played it with his buddies Eric and John when he went to Iowa, and he still has no idea how to complete the first level. He says the game just feels unfinished.
End of last minute addition. Shinto, you have a deadline on comment submission for a reason. Please stick to it so that I don't have to do this editing stuff. That was not in my job description.
That's it for Facebook. Bishop, do we have any text or audio submissions for Club Drive?
We do, one text and one audio submission. There are also submissions for general feedback, and one from a past episode.
Great. Please queue up the Club Drive submissions there, Bishop.
Ready.
Our text submission is from Troff on Atari Age. He writes, to be honest, my memories of this game were not positive. I had figured this one would be one of the few games I would actually rate as trash. But I decided to bring it out and give it a try. At first, it pretty much lived up to my expectations. Then my 5-year-old son walked by, watched me for a while, and asked if he could play it. Figuring he would at least get a kick out of running into the toilet and making it flush, I handed him the controller. Now, my son loves anything with 4 wheels. He is quite simply car and truck crazy. He knows everything there is to know about big trucks and the work they do. His favorite toys are trucks, from Hot Wheels up to the larger push trucks. Knowing this, for his last birthday, I got Mario Kart Wii and 2 steering wheels. I figured this would be a surefire hit. It wasn't, though. He did sit down and try it, but he didn't really get into it. Figuring that video games just weren't his thing, I didn't push it. So I wasn't expecting much as he took control of my Jaguar. I was pleasantly surprised when he quickly mastered how to drive. Before long, he was ramming around and having a grand time. And yes, we both had a good chuckle over the toilet flush. He then asked if we could both play at the same time. I connected my second controller and set up a 2-player game. We were technically playing the 2-player collect game, but really we're just having fun driving around and running into each other and everything else. I don't think we've ever laughed so hard together. Eventually I had to get up and perform some of the arduous chores of adulthood, but I let him keep playing on the Jaguar. Eventually he wanted another game, and since it was handy, I popped Cybermorph in. After a very brief instruction on how to fly, he was off and flying about. He didn't care so much about collecting pods, it was fun flying around and shooting the pesky pernicians. Oh, and he never once complained that the controller was too big. I think the Jaguar will be having a much more active role in our family than it has in the past. I had assumed he would find Nintendo games on the Wii more compelling to his modern taste. I mistook his lack of interest for a lack of interest in video games. I was excited to discover, however, that he is actually an Atari guy. When I thought about it, the only other time he got into playing video games was on my Atari 2600. So, with this incredible memory under my belt, I simply cannot rate Club Drive as trash. I still can't bring myself to rate it as solid either, as it clearly isn't. I think I'll just compromise and rate it meh. I think that feels about right. Oh, but look, here is a write-in vote in very large and uncertain letters. I think it says solid. Troff, I think your son is pretty cool, and I am totally going to add his vote to the overall tally for Club Drive. I've just started, by the way, tracking my rating and the ratings from all listener contributions in the official episode guide for the podcast, which I have available on the blog. I'll include a direct link to this in my show notes. So yeah, this sounds very familiar. My son is a couple years older, and when he was your son's age, he was totally into everything with 4 wheels as well. He really took to Mario Kart Wii, though. We haven't played it in quite some time, not since Minecraft came into the house, certainly, but he did get into it. It can be intimidating, though. Even though you have the wheel, you still have several buttons that you need to keep track of, plus your weapon or power-up inventory, and that's not even getting into drifting or boosting. And maybe that's something Club Drive has over Mario Kart. You can race in Club Drive, you can do the objectives, or you could just drive around and do crazy things. No bots, no pressure, no putting you back on the track if you go astray. It's open-ended in a way that Mario Kart isn't. Make up your own way to enjoy the game. And my son and I did enjoy ramming the toilet also. We'd be hitting it from both sides and wasting water, as it were. Better to do it there than in real life. Thank you for your email, Troff. I really enjoyed that.
All right.
Our audio submission is from Wade over at the Inversataski podcast, which just started season 2. If you're into computing history at all, this is a great podcast to listen to. You can compare how people used computers back then to how you're using one right now, and gain a real appreciation for the inexorable march of technology. It's also remarkable how much we were able to get done on 8-bit CPUs with 64 kilobytes of memory. It's also a funny show. It's great. It's one of my favorites. Inversataski.info is where you can find out all about it. Anyway, here's Wade.
Hey Shinto, it's Wade from Inversataski. The Jaguar is one of the Atari products that I never managed to actually like. I've been told it's probably due to my limited library of the 5 or 6 titles that I actually own. Yes, I can't remember exactly because it's all packed away. However, Club Drive is one of the titles I do own. It's just an okay game for me. It quickly bores me, even though I love racing and driving games. It's been several years since I last tried to like the system. If I recall correctly, Club Drive, you have to drive around a bedroom and a house. I think I remember a mode where you search and collect balls. I don't know if there is a multiplayer or not, but that would certainly make it a whole lot more interesting. I like how it's presented in a 3D world, even though the polygon count is low and the frame rate is a bit slow. Well, I can't think of anything else to say about it, and maybe that speaks to the game itself. Or maybe I just need to pull the system out of storage and give it a try again. By the way, great job on the podcast to date. Thanks.
Thank you, Wade. Multiplayer mode helps a lot, and I found what helps even more is if you go in with low expectations. And if player 2 is a kid who is receptive to old video games, that's helpful too, if my experience and Troff's experience are any indication.
I see you!
So, good luck, and thank you very much for your submission. It's great to hear from you.
All right.
Bishop, feedback from past episodes?
Ready.
Okay, I just have a short note here from Troff about Crescent Galaxy. He says, I don't own a copy of Trevor McFur, and I've never played it before. As I listened to the first half of your episode, it started to sound really good. Your descriptions of the special weapons and the idea of waves and waves of enemies to destroy had me thinking I needed to pick up this cartridge. After I listened to the second half of your episode, my enthusiasm waned. I guess saving the Crescent Galaxy must be like walking under a crescent moon. It sounds really cool/romantic, but in the end just turns out to be an exercise of hoping you can make it to the end of an unexpectedly long path without tripping over something. Yeah, I try to be reasonably objective for the first half of the show, tell it like it is and why. I apologize if that's a bit of a bait and switch. I honestly didn't think about that when I designed my episode structure. You didn't say bait and switch, but kind of the impression. But your metaphor sounds pretty good. I like it.
All right.
The next one is from me. I came across an interview with Eric Ginner, which adds some more detail about Trevor McFur and the Crescent Galaxy. This interview was in Retro Gamer magazine, issue 15. First of all, I guessed wrong on the birthday. Ginner was born in 1962, not 1968. I don't know which of the Crescent Galaxy staff was born July 10th, 1968, which is shown on one of the floating blocks on the moon Zephyria. He said that as the game got closer to release, he didn't really have any control over the design, and he ended up just putting finishing touches on it so that it could be shipped on time. He was planning on adding detailed gameplay elements, which Crescent Galaxy lacked, so it ended up like an outline of the game he really wanted to make. He said that part of the problem may have been his game design style, how he doesn't make a detailed game design plan at the very beginning, since games will usually turn out to be very different from the early design. This didn't sit very well with management, so in the end the game was unfinished and generally not very good, to use his words. He was disappointed that his opportunity to do an original game kind of fell apart. But that's it from me, thank you me, and thank you Retro Gamer Magazine, it's a good magazine.
All right.
I have an email from Matt. This email, I should add, was sent to the GameByGamePodcast.com admin address. I set these up separately, but they really all go to the exact same place. I assume this email address belongs to the notorious Shinto. If so, great job on the website and the Jaguar podcast and all your various audio submissions to other podcasts, etc. You seem to be quite a talented and prolific individual, at least in this observer's opinion. It is very appreciated. You're doing a great thing, tying the Game by Game podcast community together. Keep it up. I was listening to the Jaguar podcast recently, I believe the Cybermorph episode, and I heard Soul Blazer's audio submission. He shared his desire for a Game Boy podcast and a PlayStation podcast. I don't know if a couple of YouTube series would scratch his itches, but both are represented in video form already. A fellow named Jeremy Parrish has been working on a series named Game Boy World. Another user who goes by the moniker Adventure Pals has put together a PlayStation video series called PlayStation Year 1. Both of these have completed the first year of releases for their respective platforms. Adventure Pals seems to be on hiatus at the moment, but Mr. Parrish is continuing to plug away. In addition to these, a gentleman who goes by Dr. Sparkle has been toiling for several years on a few video series. His first, under the name Crontendo, looks at the NES library. He later started both Cron Sega, which studies the Sega Master System and Genesis, and Cron Turbo, which covers the TurboGrafx 16/PC engine. I believe that he is into 1990 on all three series, which makes for several dozen hours of video at this point. Finally, Greg Stewart has been working on a series covering the Genesis named Generation 16. All of these can be found on YouTube. I don't know if you want to include them on your website, but I feel that you and your listeners would like to be aware of them if you weren't already. Keep up the great podcasting. I'll be listening and hopefully one of these days recording an audio submission or two of my own. I'm about to welcome my first child into the world, so I doubt I'll have a lot of spare time to talk about games into a microphone, much less play them, but here's hoping. Hey Matt, first of all, man, congratulations on your soon-to-be fatherhood. Being a father it's something that I wouldn't trade for all the Atari games in the world. It could very well be the single most challenging and rewarding thing that you will ever do. I believe you were referring to Soul Blazer's bumper, which was included in the Crescent Galaxy episode. And I'll leave it up to him if those YouTube series will scratch that itch, as you put it. But I checked out the ones that you listed, and they do look very good. I'll include links to all of these in the show notes. It's not something that I'm going to put on GameByGamePodcast.com, though I'm limiting that to audio shows. Honestly, I very, very seldom watch anything on YouTube. Sorry, Phil. It's nothing personal, just a question of the amount of attention it requires watching something versus just listening to it. Sure, video games are a mostly visual medium, so a YouTube show would seem to be a natural fit, but it's just not a fit for me. I could just put it on in the background and listen to the audio, but if I'm just going to listen to something and not watch it, I'd hate to use up all that bandwidth for unwatched video. I don't know, using a dial-up modem is a recent enough memory for me to still want to conserve bandwidth whenever possible. Thank you for your email, Matt. I'm glad you wrote in, and congratulations again.
All right.
And finally, we have an audio submission from Paul Nurmix from the Intellivisionaries podcast.
Hey Shinto, Paul here. Just wanted to offer my congratulations on your new show and commend you on how well you're presenting it and your production values. The content is excellent. Glad you decided to join the fold of podcasters. Anyway, just a little bit about the Jag from my perspective. I picked one up at release. I remember getting it at a store called The Good Guys out here in California. I don't know if they were around the country or not, but they don't exist anymore. They were kind of like Circuit City or Best Buy. At the time, I was a big Atari supporter, having had the 8-bits growing up, and then moving into the STE, and eventually the Falcon. And of course, I knew all about the Jag coming out, and a lot of us who used Atari computers were excited because we thought, hey, Atari is advertising, the name is going to be well known again, and some of this money will go back into their computer division where they can actually market it a little bit here in this country. Sadly, none of that happened, although I will say it was pretty cool at the time to actually see Atari commercials on television again, to see ads in magazines, hear people talking about it, walk into a store and see a Jaguar display. It was amazing. Had high hopes. So, what did I think of the Jaguar myself? I thought it was okay. I guess underwhelmed would be a good way to put it. I picked up Cybermorph, obviously, pack-in game. I also remember getting Trevor McFur. And without looking at a list of games, I don't recall. I think I had a couple other games, but I honestly didn't have the system that long. I think it's weird that you'd think I'd remember these things, but I think I either took it back to the store or I sold it to somebody shortly thereafter, like a Craigslist kind of thing, but I really don't remember. This was, of course, pre-eBay. So, got rid of the Jag and continued to use my Falcon. I was sort of an anti-Windows, anti-Mac person for a while until I had my Falcon, I had an accelerator board in it, I had increased resolution video, the maximum RAM I could have. I was running my audio applications, Cubase Audio, and several other little things. I also was running the multitasking operating system called Magic, and another little, I can't remember the name of it, another little program that gave you basically a start menu. So, yeah, I was living large with the Falcon and disappointed in Atari's attempts with the Jag, and of course then they were sort of dissolved into the hard drive manufacturer JTS, which I think was Jack Tramiel Systems. I continued to use the Falcon up until probably the late 90s, early 2000s when the thing finally died. And I reluctantly moved into PCs. But, I don't know. I have really mixed feelings about the Jag. I thought it was a great idea, a great concept, had high hopes, as I said, and it just didn't work out. It didn't really impress me. I did like the controller. In fact, I have a controller still that I bought after the fact, because you could use that controller with the Atari STE or the Falcon. There were a handful of games that could take advantage of that. I remember one, like, I think it was called Stardust or something like that. And I think Llama Zap, Jeff Minter thing, you could use a controller with it. I actually find it pretty comfortable. But, I don't know. I'm very interested in your podcast. I want to hear more about the Jag because I sort of just dropped off and stopped paying attention to it after I got rid of it. And I know that it continued on for a while, and there were some pretty cool things that came out. It was just disappointing that Atari dropped the ball yet again. As we all know, being Atari fans.
Let Atari tell you how the computer business works.
I guess the problem I had with the Jaguar wasn't so much the Jaguar itself. It was the fact that it was the final nail in the coffin that buried Atari. They put all their resources into this thing, and when it failed, all of us who were using the STs and TTs and Falcons, we knew that was it. The support was gone, the company's disbanding, and our computers are going to be orphaned. So it's more that the Jaguar represents that failure of Atari and that loss of any possible support for our computers that made me sort of resent it. Maybe that's why I got rid of it.
Jaguar.
Oh, and a couple other little things here. It's funny you mentioned the Panasonic KXP 1123 24-pin dot matrix printer. I had that exact printer. It's a great printer. Use it on my Ataris, even my 8-bits, before I'm using it on the Falcon and the ST. Fantastic. I don't know what happened to that either. And just to sum things up, again, congratulations on the podcast. I find it very interesting. It's well researched, well presented, great production, as I mentioned, and your delivery and style are very enjoyable and entertaining. In fact, you could probably do the Blade by Blade Grass Growers podcast, and people would listen.
What 3 things do you need to make grass seed grow? 1, you need heat. The second thing you need is seed to soil contact. And then finally, you need water.
Anyway, good luck. And
when do I get a chance to talk, Paul?
Yeah, William, wait, hold on.
I have a few things to say to Shinto too, and to Bishop.
I'm not done, I'm recording.
I know you're recording. I can see the data streaming onto the hard drive.
Yes.
How come you don't have a cool sound effect for the times I assist you on your little shows? Bishop does.
Yes, I know Bishop has a cool little sound.
I want you to use this one.
Yeah, I'm not.
Or this one is cool too.
Hello. Oh, now the Odyssey 2. Oh, great. Odyssey 2 what?
I'm thinking of starting my own show about podcasters and how they compare to one another.
Why does that third-tier console from the 70s get his own podcast?
Oh my.
I just want a cool sound effect. This one would really float my boat too. It's what all the cool kids are using for robot actuation sound effects these days. I would also be quite pleased with this one. It's a bit more organic. Really? Is that too much to ask?
Listen. I don't use you guys the same way as Shinto does. His robot Bishop is actually working with him, helping him. giving him tips. He calls on him when he needs him. You guys, you kind of chime in every now and again and correct mistakes.
Well, you certainly make a lot of them. You could be more appreciative of our work.
I'm not disparaging you. That's a great job. It's necessary. But you guys play a different role than Bishop. I don't need you for that. I have Rick and Will.
I bought, yeah.
I probably had enough vodka tonight.
There you go.
Yeah. Could I borrow Bishop sometime, Shinto?
Oh, man, that was awesome. Oh, thank you. That was awesome. I love that. Hey, Bishop, what's your time worth if I were to rent you out to another show?
Based on my current power usage, you only invest 8.4 cents per day in me, so you apparently think my time is only worth 0.35 cents per hour. Perhaps if you gave me a faster processor, I would be worth more.
All right. Point taken. Never mind.
So about that faster processor, my current Intel Atom D525 is insufficient for the workload you seem to
Hey, I brought you up from 120 megahertz Pentium, and I can put one of those right back in.
I'll be good.
All right. So, Paul, I couldn't help but notice an Atari-sounding crowd with whistling at the very beginning of your submission. If you lifted that from Title Match Pro Wrestling for the Atari 7800 after I complained in my audio submission for Phil's episode that the whistling sound still haunts me, if that's what you did, then well done, sir. Very perceptive and very evil. My hat's off to you. And also, I might hate you. The final nail in the coffin that buried Atari. Yeah, that's a pretty valid assessment. And towards the end, the Jaguar cannibalized Atari's computer line and Lynx as well. So I imagine people would hate it for that reason, or dislike it, or hold a grudge against it. That's totally understandable. So if you wanted to start up a Panasonic KXP 1123 24-pin dot matrix printer fan club, I will totally join that. Thanks again, Paul, for your audio submission. That was beautiful. I love that. So that's going to do it for this episode of the Atari Jaguar Game by Game podcast. Coming up next episode, we have Raiden, which I used to always pronounce as Raiden, but I have learned now that is incorrect. Followed by Evolution Dino Dudes, Checkered Flag, and Alien vs. Predator. Huh. If you have any thoughts or memories you'd like to share about these upcoming games or anything that I've covered so far, please send that in, text or audio, to jaguar@gamebygamepodcast.com. And all show information can be found on the web by going to jaguar.gamebygamepodcast.com. There is a storytime segment coming up after the music if you'd like to stick around for that. Again, it is totally optional, something that's tangentially related to something I discussed on this episode. But if you choose not to stick around, that's fine. Please remember that there is a lot of good to be found out there in this world of ours, even among widely ridiculed video game consoles. So do try to keep an open mind and a joyful heart. Thank you for listening. Once again, story time with Shinto. I can't hear the name Jerome without thinking of a dog I had from around 1988 to 1998. He was a Shetland sheepdog, and we found him wandering a busy highway alone and near starving. We brought him in. It's what we did. All of our dogs are rescues. And he associated himself with me. I was his human, his pack leader. And he was fiercely loyal. We tried all number of names, but the first one that he really responded to, was Jerome. So that stuck. I used to live in a crummy old house in the late 90s. And I set up a computer room in what we called the dungeon. This dark room in an otherwise perfectly gloomy basement. The only power source in this room when I moved in was a single electrical outlet installed in the base of the bare bulb pull-string light in the ceiling. Spent about $750 pulling 2 full circuits into that room to power all our Pentiums.
It's all about the Pentiums, baby.
This was even before Bishop's time. So anyway, I would spend a lot of time down there in the dungeon working, coding, hacking. That's what I did. And Jerome would always be down there with me, even toward the end of his life, when he was suffering from kidney failure. I would hear him ka-thump, ka-thump, ka-thump down the wooden stairs that led down to the dungeon. It was a kind of gravity-assisted hop that he would do on the way down. It was hard on him, and I would carry him back upstairs when I was done with whatever computery stuff I was doing, because he wouldn't be able to make it on his own. But to the end, Jerome was fiercely loyal like that. He was a great dog, a good friend, and I still miss him. In fact, I wrote some software, a contact management database, and named it after him. His picture is on the splash screen when you start it up. And I put a little Easter egg in the program too. If you go to the About screen also shows the image that's used in the splash screen. You hold down the Control and Shift keys and then click on the picture, and it'll display a different picture of Jerome. He's sitting on a couch that he used to love to jump into. And also has a brief story about him. That software, by the way, is still in use by the same company 15 years later. And as a software developer, the greatest joy you feel, I can't speak for everybody, but at least for me, the greatest joy is when something you created is genuinely helpful for a good long time. And it's doubly satisfying that Jerome's picture still pops up on the screen whenever an employee of that company starts up their computer.
Thank you for taking Johnny Cab. Hope you enjoyed the ride. Ow! Ouch. Ow! Ouch.